All right, welcome. All right, so you guys are in Drupal on the big screen. You guys probably saw from the description on the session. I'm going to be looking at some work that I did on a kiosk project for the United States Air Force, their bands, specifically their concert band. Hopefully you guys will get something out of this. I'm going to go into a little bit of background on Decoupled, do a case study on like some of the lessons that I learned building this thing, and then, really quick and dirty demo, just kind of showing how easy it can be to get started with some of these web services and decoupled Drupal. So, my name is Brian. I'm a senior developer at Acquia. I'm going to ask you guys to go easy on me. This is my first presentation. This is also my first time presenting, obviously this presentation, so I'll be looking for your feedback, what I could do better for next time, and maybe I'll get a chance to present it again at home. I'm based on the East Coast, out of Washington, D.C., so that's all my contact info. I'll also make these slides available. I'll try to on the Badcamp website, so you guys have them if you're interested. And a little bit on what we're going to be covering. So as I mentioned, we're going to go through a little bit of background on headless, headless implementation, specifically with Drupal. This one was built with Angular and Drupal, so if you know Angular, you'll be able to follow my examples really easily. If you don't, you'll still be able to. They're pretty straightforward. We'll go into a case study on the actual kiosk. I'll show you guys some images. I don't have the Air Force's kiosk running, but I do have a demo of one, basically gutted it and put some Badcamp specific stuff in there. So hope you guys will like that. So part one, a little bit of background. Like who here knows, what a decoupled Drupal implementation entails? Just a quick show of hands. Got a couple. Anyone actually work on a decoupled Drupal implementation? I know this guy has. Right, that's good. So this background will hopefully give you enough to kind of follow along with some of the concepts I'm going to be presenting. Here I have a really simple illustration. So on the left is your traditional CMS. This is Drupal, as we all know and love. Drupal does everything for us. Everything from your content creation tools. I didn't put in here, but all your layout tools and everything you need to design a website really is contained within the wrapper of the CMS. So Drupal does a lot, all the way through rendering our pages for us. When we start to look at decoupled implementations of Drupal, Drupal's doing everything up until that presentation piece. So decoupling Drupal is really just a way to take your presentation logic and decouple it from your CMS. So let Drupal do what it's best at, and if you need more specific presentation logic or technologies on the front end, you have a lot of flexibility to do that if you're looking at a decoupled approach to your CMS. One of the differences you'll know in this diagram here, I have presentation logic here, which eventually leads to your rendered pages. So a request comes in, Drupal figures out what it needs to show you based on what that request is. In the decoupled model, a lot of times what will happen is that request comes in, Drupal goes up to that point, and rather than rendering a page, it will just deliver data. For everything that I've done, it's JSON, but it can be XML as well. And so that's your basic traditional, versus a headless approach. Headless comes in multiple flavors, though. And just to make it clear, headless and decoupled kind of refer to the same thing. I might just switch to decoupled because it's a little bit easier to kind of describe some of the concepts I'm going with by using that term. But on the left, this is what we just saw, where your presentation logic is completely separate from everything CMS. But there's another idea called progressively decoupled, where you kind of keep a little bit of what Drupal has to offer on the front end, but you have components on the page that are still, taking that API approach, calling back to your server, grabbing that JSON and then rendering it, with whatever, front-end technology you want, if that's Angular or React or whatever. And what that'll look like is you'll have a page that will be delivered by Drupal. Everything will be there. You'll have essentially placeholders for these more advanced components that are coming from, Angular or Ember, your other front-end framework. And that can be a really nice compromise, depending on what your project needs. If you are thinking about, you have like a little Angular component that you want to throw on a page, but you don't want to go completely headless because you don't want to necessarily rebuild your theme from the ground up. So that's just a nice compromise. I've done actually most of the decoupled work I've done to date has been kind of along that model, not necessarily throwing away Drupal's front end completely, but building in some components that move me more towards headless, but not going completely. So a little bit on why you might choose a decoupled architecture. You get a lot of flexibility in your presentation layer. For this kiosk, that's exactly what I was looking for. I knew that it wasn't a website. I was presenting it in the context of a website, and that it was HTML and CSS and JavaScript, that got rendered by a browser. But I didn't need it to feel like a website. So, that's one situation where you might decide a decoupled approach is better for you. You don't need pages per se. You need a web application, and you need that flexibility. Along with that, you might get increased speed and responsiveness. Again, if you're building something that feels more like a native app, with Angular, for example, coming along with that is that increased feeling of speed and responsiveness. If you can imagine, the web app is loaded and content is just requested and served. In addition, there's a lot less network traffic in a lot of cases because you're not delivering full pages for every interaction of your user. More interactive interfaces, and a big one. I don't know how many of you guys were at the front end summit a couple days ago. Anyone here? So yeah, there was a big discussion about the future of headless, the future of Drupal, and like what it kind of means for the CMS. And one of the points that kept coming up is that front end devs don't need to know Drupal. I kind of view that as a pro and a con. On the one hand, front-end devs don't need to know Drupal, but at the same time, if you're a small shop like me, when I do my freelance stuff, it means you need to know whatever the front-end technology is, so it's no longer enough to just know Drupal. Some reasons, and there are lots of other reasons, it just kind of depends on what you're looking for from your decoupled approach, why you might go in that direction. So have some possible downsides. And this is a short list, but there are a lot. I mean, you really have to know what you're getting into before you start. Another one of the questions that came out of that front-end summit is, if we are like a smaller shop, how do we get started with some of these things? And I think there were a lot of good suggestions that came out of the summit, but like one that I'll reiterate is just, keep it as simple as possible. And sometimes, that just means doing that progressively decoupled approach where you're not completely throwing away Drupal's front end, you're just kind of working in components to get a feel for what Drupal's capabilities are. So, the headless approach, of course, introduces more complexity. There's more technology in your stack. You possibly lose a lot of out-of-the-box Drupal, specifically if you're going for that completely headless approach. And it can be more difficult for smaller single-person teams. So I leave you with this message. If you are considering it, of course, it's your choice, but choose wisely. There are a lot of pros and cons. I'm going to throw all that out the window, though, when I move into like this actual case study for this kiosk, because this is it's pretty specialized. I would say like the Angular front end was definitely a better fit for what I was trying to do than Drupal as a back end. But I'll kind of get into some of the reasons why I chose each as I move on to it. So with the case study, I'll give you guys a little bit of background about how I even fell into this. So my wife is actually a musician. She plays with the Air Force Concert Band, and she's been there for 5-6 years now. I'm also a musician, and I do a lot of freelance stuff, and specifically for musicians. So I help friends out, and I know a lot of people in the band, and they've all been pushing me towards kind of helping their digital presence. Specifically, they tour a lot. And one of the things they do is they bring a giant booth with them wherever they go. So that's their digital strategy. It's a giant booth they set up. It takes them half a day. They put up posters. I believe they have one screen that they actually do bring with them right now. It's not a touch screen, but it plays like some looping video that, from what I hear, doesn't work half the time. So they needed some help. This project for me started as really a proof of concept. I'd wanted to do something like this for a while. I knew that they had a need, and I had a connection. So I knew the people to talk to, and we had a couple conversations, and eventually I produced some designs that they really liked, and we were able to kind of start from there. So, the client comes to me, and this is still during the proof of concept phase, and they had a really a pretty simple checklist. So they wanted this thing to be user-friendly. They knew they were targeting a touchscreen. They wanted to upgrade their hardware for this booth. They're already using, a lot of social media, or trying to, so they wanted to integrate some of that. And a big part of what they wanted to show on the kiosk were details about their upcoming concerts, details about each of the ensembles. The Air Force Band is made up actually of a bunch of different smaller ensembles that they kind of combine and send all over the place. And they wanted to show bios for all the musicians. And they left me, this is paraphrasing, but basically they told me, use whatever you want. We don't care how you do it. Just, make it cool, make it interesting. They were really looking for anything that was better than what they had. So I look at this and I found a magical unicorn, right? Because first of all, rarely does something this interesting fall into my lap, especially in my freelance stuff, which tends to be smaller scale and really simple. It's the kind of stuff I do to help out friends more than it is for the professional experience. It was awesome, and they seemed really cool. They were willing to let me essentially experiment. We didn't have a contract or anything at this point. It was still just a proof of concept, but they were definitely interested, and I was interested. So that was a really great jumping off point for me. Things got interesting. Eventually this proof of concept, as I mentioned, I produced some designs for them, kind of showing what the kiosk could do, and they took hold immediately, and we kind of scoped out some work and came up with an initial deliverable. It was only after that time that I realized they had a legacy CMS that they were imagining, probably 90% of the information would come from that CMS. The Air Force uses something called AFPIMS. I have very little information on AFPIMS. If you Google AFPIMS, the second result in Google is a Facebook page on how much AFPIMS sucks. The stakeholder that I was in contact with over there, I later learned, of course, his main concern is he doesn't want to do double data entry. He knew that he had the CMS. He knew that he had this data in one place. He didn't want to have to, pull people off of what they were doing to go and recreate what they needed for the kiosk. Even though it would have been a much smaller subset of what they were using on their, their main site as far as the bios and the concert information. We had to get creative. And that's actually kind of one of the big lessons I learned on this project was kind of how to manage that situation and in a technical way, which the headless implementation is actually really good at. So in this case, it was headless to the rescue, right? I'm building a front-end application, and I should be able to build this thing in such a way that doesn't care what the back end does. I know already it's pulling data from multiple sources. If one of those happens to be AFPIMS, should be fine, right? I should be able to design an API, and they should be able to deliver me what I need. The problem is, I was being realistic, and I had a feeling I was going to have very little control over what they were actually going to be able to deliver. And at this point, it was no longer a proof of concept. We had a pretty hard deadline. They had a 75th anniversary or something, and they had a bunch of alumni coming, and there was this big demo planned. But the stakeholders holding on to this idea that eventually there'll be this API coming from this, CMS we hate, but it'll get done. I know who to talk to. I haven't talked to him yet, but I know who to talk to. So what that kind of led to was, as I'm developing the front end, I had to keep a really open mind about how data was going to be ingested, what was going to be delivered to me, knowing that I was going to have, very little control over that data. And the control was less of an issue for me than the unknown, and especially the unknown timing about when they were actually going to be able to deliver it. And eventually we kind of came up with a design. Here's a GIF just kind of going through some of the UI elements, but I'll talk through how we ended up here a little bit as well. So what I ended up doing, this is how Drupal came into the mix in the first place. I knew that I could stand up a really simple Drupal site really easily. I've used feeds a bunch for this kind of uncontrolled migration, and I built a really basic scraper. I was able to pull in just enough data for the MVP, and I did it really quickly and really easily. And on top of that, I've worked with Drupal, in that progressively decoupled way before, so I was pretty confident that I was going to be able to build whatever API I needed for the kiosk. And then even in the future, if an API was delivered to me that didn't really match my expectations, the Drupal one would be easy enough to adapt if I wanted to use both, or I could throw it out. So that's how Drupal came into the mix. It really wasn't my first choice for this project. I was thinking I'd do something in JavaScript. The data storage needs weren't very large, but it actually worked out really well once I had it in place. So there's a scraper that ran, grabbed everything I needed for this initial version of the kiosk, and we kind of went from there. So this is the home page right here, and this is going to keep moving, so I'll just kind of talk abstractly about what it contains. The kiosk, demos like what they asked for, so everything about the ensembles you could ever imagine. It's got descriptions of each ensemble, it's got lists of members, it links to the social media accounts for each of the ensembles, pulls in photos and videos and displays them. I think it's this next page it's going to show. In a nice way that's easily scrollable. People can just kind of click through. Basically, everything you're seeing in the UI is able to be touched and interacted with, which was a nice touch, I think, as far as interactivity. And that was one of the features that I knew that I wasn't going to get, at least not easily, from just like a regular Drupal front end, without having to write a lot of extra JavaScript and kind of squeeze it in there. On top of that, we've got calendar integrations. So right now, we're pulling from, in the live kiosk, we're pulling from a calendar they have on their site, which I believe is up right now, but it's a little bit iffy. And that's for like larger organizational events. They have several Google calendars that it's pulling from for each of the ensembles. And it's actually able to take any kind of ICS, iCal feed. And that's actually what the demo later on is going to look at, just kind of how comparing like how I ingest similar but not exactly the same data from different sources, but presented in a unified way in the kiosk. So, and this is the calendar view. Actually, I'm going to go to the next slide because I kind of go through like some of the technology here. So, as I mentioned, it's an AngularJS front end. It's using Drupal 7. Facebook, YouTube, Google Maps API, Calendar, and there's like a geocoding API it's using as well from Google. So why Angular? I like a lot of things about AngularJS. People have their preferences. In reality, you can build a kiosk like this with whatever you want. That's not really here what I'm here to preach. But I like Angular, and for me, it came down to familiarity. I've used it a bunch, and it kind of gave me what I needed. Specifically, I like how flexible their services can be. And I'm going to go through a services example in Angular, specifically with this iCal feed. And then I've kind of explained, how Drupal came into the mix, but it really is an excellent CMS. It was a really easy sell once we kind of realized that their legacy CMS wasn't going to deliver what we wanted. Just kind of showing him, look, I've got this thing up. Look, your data's magically there. I'm not going to keep scraping things from you, from your legacy site, but if you want to maintain this, I will hand it over to you, and you can keep the kiosk up to date on your own. And he was happy to use the content management tools in Drupal. It was pretty easy for him to learn. And it's really easy, especially in Drupal 8. I'm using Drupal 7 just because I wasn't comfortable with D8 yet and had a deadline. But I've played around with REST services in D8, and they're really easy to get some basic REST, like a RESTful API set up just using your content types. And there's even like a REST UI module that makes a lot of that configurable completely through the UI. And of course, the familiarity piece again for me. This is a crazy map I tried to draw that kind of maps, if you start at the top of the page, these are some of the different screens available in the Air Force's version of this kiosk. And the dotted lines are just kind of connecting the information displayed in that particular view to different back-end data sources. And if you look at how this is organized, Drupal's actually kind of a small part of the overall, like this network map. Like I mentioned, Facebook is actually powering, as you can see, the photo gallery and part of the video gallery. YouTube is also powering the video gallery. Google kind of makes it into a lot of different places. Events are displayed various places throughout the kiosk, so it's constantly pulling from the calendar feeds, but it geocodes every location it finds in any event it pulls from any source. And then Google Maps is featured pretty primarily on that calendar overview page. And this slide was just to kind of show this like stack with the information about the actual ensemble. It's pretty Drupal heavy. That's a good question. So I'm calling all of these directly from Angular. I'm going to go into like some of my design challenges in a minute, but one of the interesting things is I had a very limited or a very like defined set of constraints about where this was going to appear and how I needed to use that data. So there's some caching happening on the Angular side, but Drupal doesn't know or care about any of its API siblings essentially. But yeah, so this like ensemble stack that has all the information, I call it like the Air Force Band specific information, and this implementation relies pretty heavily on Drupal, and it's calling from my D7 site. I've got a couple of resources available for like lists of members, lists of ensembles, details about ensembles and members. Pretty basic, all also read-only from this kiosk. But yeah, once we get to the other parts of the kiosk, Drupal kind of doesn't play as big a role, which was interesting for me as a Drupal developer who's trying to fit Drupal into this kiosk and like find a home for it. I think it fit really well. One of Drupal's strengths in this case is that that's the API I had control over. So I could make my data exactly what I needed. I didn't have to do any extra processing in most cases on the Angular side, whereas for like some of, for example, I'll give you an example. I have a video feed that is able to pull in videos from a Facebook feed or like a YouTube playlist. Their APIs are pretty different. They're going to deliver me different data, but for the kiosk, I needed to come up with a way, like in a service, to kind of normalize the differences and deliver something, so the kiosk didn't really care where the source was to kind of combine them. Oh yeah.
What are the light blue lines?
Just to make it less confusing, they don't mean anything different. It was just hard for me to draw all dark lines. I couldn't really follow them, so I changed some of the overlapping ones to a different color. Yeah, but yeah, the light blue lines don't actually mean anything different. This calendar one, actually, I'll go to the next slide, is what we're going to be looking at in the demo. And here's that light blue line. So this is just showing you that the calendar view that I'm going to be focusing on is pulling information, well, from Drupal primarily for this demo, but it's also pulling from a Google Calendar, and it's also sending a request to Google's geocoding API to get geocoordinates for the locations it finds in each of those events. And finally, there's a map on that same page, so there's a request going out to Google Maps to render the map, and as you're able to scroll and zoom in the map and stuff. So I'm about to move into the demo, but I wanted to take a quick pause to see if anyone had any questions so far, just about what I've presented, the case study part.
Just a quick question. You're saying that you were screen scraping information off of their website?
Yeah.
So that seems hardly reliable.
No, it's not. And I set the expectation right up front. So I really, to go back to that background piece, I built that because I needed something to like build around. So that's how it started. And eventually I showed them, what I had. They weren't concerned about the scraper. I actually didn't even mention the scraper.
Oh.
To him, it just got there by magic. But I was able to hand that over to him and say, if you'd like to keep this up to date, you're able to add new bios and whatever you need to do in the system that I've set up for you. So,
in other words, he doesn't go back and then run a scraper again. He just uses regular editorial.
Exactly. Yes.
Right.
He's not going to be running that scraper again.
But if they change the design or something, then that's going to break.
Yes and no. The scraper will definitely break, but again, that's not a lasting tool.
Yeah.
It's like something I put together on a Saturday afternoon just to like be able to move forward with my work. But I did reason with myself. I know that this website has not changed in
Oh.
however many years. Like, you can look at the way the code is, and like the XPath is going to be what it is. Like, it's not going to change anytime soon. And when it does, they'll be ready for a new solution anyway. So it's like the glacier of websites. I don't have to really worry, if I were to depend on that scraper going forward, about it changing too drastically. Other questions on their version of the kiosk before I move into our Badcamp kiosk? All right.
Are you going to show a little bit of code later? Or no?
Yeah, I'm going to show some code in the demo here. Just give me 1 second to get to my notes on this.
I'm just curious what kind of hardware is running on the kiosk.
I don't actually know what it is. It's a 42-inch touchscreen TV. I know it's got like an embedded OS. It's running Windows. I'm running the kiosk in Chrome, which is really nice for me to be able to know up front, because I've got some like CSS3 animations going, and some stuff like I really coded specifically for Chrome. Again, something that I would never be able to do in another project, but I knew exactly how this was going to be presented, and had a lot of control over that.
And some version of Windows.
Yeah, I think it's Windows 10. I'm not a Windows guy, so I looked at it, and it looks like Windows 10, but that's about all I know.
Were there performance issues with the embedded sort of solution on the screen itself? Did you find that it would
You know,
flavor?
performance issues were interesting. I didn't talk about it. Let me actually just go back to the visual here. So one of the things I did, all the animations are CSS, and those are fine. This one right there that just happened, there's this like little flip up and out. It doesn't look as good as it does on my computer, but it certainly runs fine. It's just not as smooth. I see it and I'm a little bothered, because I know how like silky smooth it is when I look at it on my machine. Or I actually do have like Windows machines in my house that I tested it on, like connected to TVs. It looks great there. It was a little bit slower, but everything was fine. Let me wait till it gets back to, actually maybe if I do this, it'll just trigger back to the home page.
It looks like you have video too as well, right?
So yeah, it's not video. The little squares that you see kind of moving there, that's a jQuery, like a jQuery plugin I built, just for this one particular animation. Luckily, I had the foresight, like it's calculating frame rate and stuff, and I have a variable in there that I was able to just dial way down for this screen, and now it runs fine. But at the setting I had, running locally, it was a little bit problematic. But yeah, that was just, like a frame rate issue, trying to do a little bit too much on that machine. But other than that, it's been running fine. The embedded OS for me hasn't been a problem at all. And knowing that I was able to deploy to a Chrome browser really helped me kind of plan technically what I was able to go for.
Was it running Chrome in kiosk mode? Or?
Yeah, actually, I'm running it in kiosk mode, which I actually don't really know what all that does, except for launch it in full screen and get rid of all the navigation on top. But yeah, it's a really nice solution from what I've seen, and as long as we're on the problem of like challenges that came up after the fact related to this kiosk, they've placed it in a place in their building, and it's this concrete building, and the machine's on Wi-Fi. So the network connectivity is really, really poor. For some things, it's not a problem, but specifically, I have a photo gallery in this kiosk that pulls. I didn't implement any kind of lazy loading, so it pulls all, I don't know what the threshold I set was, 100 or so images at the same time, which can take a second to load the first time, but then the browser caches the images. And the nice thing about this particular kiosk implementation is caching is awesome on the browser side, because I don't do anything else with the browser. The kiosk loads. I don't really reload it. I do have one fail-safe in here. If someone navigates to a page other than the home page, after 5 minutes or so, it will do a hard reload and go back to the home page, just so the next person isn't kind of lost in the navigation.
Just one last question. So if this is in a public space somewhere, not necessarily behind a door that someone can see, how do you deal with things like, do you need to lock the screen? I don't think Chrome does that.
Chrome does not have that ability. So it's right now, they just have it in their band building. I don't know that they plan to put it in like an unattended public space. That's not the plan right now. Like phase 2 for them is to actually bring it on tour with them, and they want to also have it available on iPads for them to show other people, like kind of a face-to-face interaction with this digital tool. One of the funny things about the hardware, though, is like their particular screen, you can pinch and zoom, which is not something that I would have ever anticipated because I don't have a touchscreen in my house. Also, not really how iOS works. Like it'll zoom the entire screen just by you doing a pinch and zoom. So my wife likes to just mess with me, and she'll go up to the screen and like pinch it and zoom it to like someone's face and be like, "Oh, your kiosk broke," and I didn't know what was going on at first. But that's like that. That's not really something. I don't consider that so much a problem on my end because I'm not in control of the hardware at the end of the day, and that kind of stuff I'm not going to be able to solve, through my program. So there were little things like that, but for where it is and how it's working right now, it's actually turned out to be really, really nice and really smooth. So, all right. On to demo time. So I mentioned I'm going to be talking. So what I've done, actually, let me just go ahead and switch over. I set up a really basic Drupal site. I talked myself out of doing like a fully live demo. I was going to go through these steps, and that just seemed like a bad idea. So I kind of did some of this in advance yesterday. But I just set up a really simple content type for session. I can show you. It's just got some really basic fields, title, body, just the stuff that I want to be able to display in that calendar view. So I've got a body, a date, and this location field, which is just a plain text field. It's going to take whatever I type in there. And then I have, this is D8, but I think the Views iCal module will work just as well in D7. And what I'm doing is I'm exposing an iCal feed, through Drupal. And this is just pulling in events, sorting them by date, really, really basic stuff. I did a little bit to format this, this iCal feed in a way that I would expect, from Google. But my demo is going to show, well, let me just switch over to the presentation, and I'll just kind of show you how I would handle some of those data differences. And a quick disclaimer. I thought about maybe actually setting up a RESTful web service in D8 to show you how easy that is, but the kiosk, the way it's architected, it would have been a little bit more awkward to demo that part of the kiosk. The calendar is like the most upfront and has the least moving pieces for me, so I went with that instead. But I have a link down here. There's a really great Drupalize Me article on just how to get started with RESTful web services in D8. I've been through it. It's really helpful. It's really straightforward. I don't remember if they mentioned this REST UI, but I've used that as well, which again gives you the ability to do a lot of this configured directly in Drupal. So really, really easy to get started.
Is that is over 2.5 years? Is it still a good one to start off launching?
I think so, because I actually went through it. Maybe like a year ago is when I encountered it, and I'd hope it's mostly up to date, and I'd probably see if it's completely broken in the comments. But yeah, so but I did find that really helpful just to get started, and the UI module specifically to kind of get a handle on things to get started. Okay, so again, we're looking at this calendar view. There's a map on that page. And then we're going to be looking at, for this demo, data coming from Drupal and data coming from a Google Calendar. I have a code sample in here. I'll get to it later. So this first snippet, is anyone familiar with Angular? This is actually Angular 1. So if you've worked with Angular at all, this should probably look pretty familiar. And basically what I'm doing is setting up a provider. That's going to take some configuration for my kiosk. So one of the things I want to note here is that I end up setting, separate config for Google calendars and for iCal calendars. Yeah, I can highlight those. Which is just really nice because later I don't have to try and figure out after the fact what it was. I'm handling the data in nearly identical ways, but with the variations I need for each. So really simple. Just note this is called calendar configuration, and Angular will be expressed as calendar configuration provider later on. And so what that allows me to do after setting up the little config service, and by the way, it's abbreviated here. I didn't think I needed to write it out, but I can tell you what it's doing in there. It's really simple. All it does is store the variables I give it. My signature here for the Google Calendar is it takes a label, which appears in the UI. It takes a calendar ID, which you get directly from the Google Calendar, and this is actually optional, but it's an API key if it's not, like the globally configured API key or other Google services. And then like really similar for the iCal calendar, which the idea there is anything other than Google for this kiosk. Anyway, that allows me to, with really simple one-line configuration, add new data sources. And I follow this model with basically everything that I'm importing into the kiosk. So I'll have a service for to configure what the API endpoint is, and any parameters I need to access that endpoint, and then I kind of specify them in a config method on either the main module or I end up having modules for each of the page if it's something that's scoped to a different like page level in this application. But I'm just calling calendar configuration provider, and I call both my add iCal calendar and my add Google Calendar methods here. You don't really need to see all this, but for the UI demo later, you'll see them labeled as either sessions, in which case they come from our iCal calendar, or Bay Area events, in which they come from. I didn't include this because that's my my private Google account, but they come from the Google Calendar if it's called Bay Area events. Obviously, those are fictional in both cases, but yeah. Just note that I do configure both separately. And so just like a really quick comparison, on the left we have, this is the feed coming from Google. Don't really need to try and interpret all of these things. I haven't worked with iCal feeds very much, but from what I've seen, there is a standard. And then it's really easy for providers to deviate from that standard. In Drupal, when you're creating this iCal feed, and I haven't worked with it much in D7, but at least in D8, there's some definite configuration steps you need to do to make it match the expected iCal format. And the module has instructions on what it expects you to do that. But I'll just point out, these are actually really similar. A lot more data coming from Google, but I didn't feel the need to plug all of that in. Just the stuff I needed for my display is going to show up in my iCal feed. So in this case, it's actually kind of easy to work with the two. I'm essentially just taking key value pairs, looking for the key I need from whatever feed it is, and getting the value and doing whatever I need with it. This is the Google Calendar feed, and compared to the calendar from that legacy CMS. So this was a mess. It was not, adhering to the standard. It actually took me a while to figure out why the iCal module I was using with Angular just kept throwing up all over this iCal feed, because I built it with a test feed I'd put together, and he finally delivers the endpoint, and nothing works. Luckily for me, I'd already separated the configuration for the different data sources and was able to really easily adapt what my service was doing based on what the data I was being given was. So essentially, what I have is in that same service module that's going to provide the configuration service, I have just a generic calendar service that has these fetch methods. So setting this up, I've got a fetch gcal events and I got a fetch iCal events. The internals of these are going to be really similar again. They're just fetching the data and they return a promise. And then I tie it all together in this case with the fetch events method, which is what pretty much every part of the kiosk is going to call, because again, it's not, at least in my design, it's never important where the data is coming from. Sometimes there are labels attached to data for different ensembles, and this is of course a pretty simplified example, but sometimes I'll go through and just kind of parse based on ensemble, but This fetch events method just kind of calls, it's a wrapper for the two like implementation specific or feed specific methods that I'd already added to the service. And then again, what the really nice part about that is all the complicated stuff happens in the service. When I go back to my controller, things are really simple. I get to populate the scope with just the single call to fetch events, and all my events are there, which is really nice. All right. So with that, that's the end of like the technical part. I'm going to show you guys. I have this kiosk that I put together, just kind of plugging in some of the data that we saw. On the left here is just like a list of sessions. Some of these are coming from the iCal feed that's coming from Drupal. Some of them are coming from the Google Calendar, but you wouldn't really know it looking at the UI. This is actually one of my favorite parts of the kiosk too. Actually, I like the way that I implemented this map, and they seemed pretty happy with it. But basically, what you have in the UI is a list of events, and this would be a much longer list if this were obviously longer feeds that I was working with. And then let's see if it works. Okay, good. So it found the location. I'll view that on map. And so basically what's happened is pulled information from the feed, it got a list of events, and I didn't show it in my example, but that service is also responsible for calling Google's geocoding API, passes in the address and kind of takes whatever it gives it. That was also one of the interesting things. Luckily, this is the Air Force band, and I'm building this for the set of bands that's in the DC area. I could probably have done a lot more complicated and fancy stuff around like filtering the data that Google's geocoding API brings back. I don't know who's worked with it before, but when I first started testing, I was getting some kind of crazy results. And the kiosk kind of has this mentality where it does the fetch, it calls the API, and it just plugs in whatever you give it, which is fine, except for when they're on tour. Because then they start going to some kind of crazy locations, and like they won't necessarily label their data very well. It'll just be the name of a venue. They won't really give it, like a city or address or anything like that. And Google can return some funky results that way. But rather than address that technically, I just told them, hey, if you see something weird on the kiosk, just go back to Google Calendar, and you should probably put an address in there because it's going to take its best guess and run with it. But I know that like the API has parameters you can pass about like how exact the match needs to be, and even the geographical region that it needs to appear in. And yeah, there's a lot of like UI stuff that I can talk about. A lot that I can't because I didn't plug in those pieces of the kiosk. But yeah, I'll probably leave it there. I also just plugged in a YouTube feed so you guys could see another part of this kiosk. I didn't know there was sound to any of these. I'm gonna mute that. But yeah, it's just a really basic video player that's built directly in the kiosk. I can tell you like one of the things he'd asked for originally. My stakeholder knew that he wanted to use YouTube videos, and he literally asked me for a link. He just wanted a link anywhere in there. I could place it wherever I wanted. It could be a button or a link, but it just needed to go to YouTube so that people could see his YouTube videos. Just to kind of give you a sense of the state of mind they were in when we started. So yeah, it was really nice to be able to give them, I think more than they expected, and something that actually works for a change. But so yeah, I guess I'll leave it there. I think we're actually kind of out of time. I meant to leave a little bit of time for questions, but if anyone has any more questions, I am happy to answer those. And as I mentioned, I'm going to try and make these slides, available for you guys on the Bandcamp page. They're not there yet, but once they are, I think they just put it on or I'll be able to put it on the session page where they're available. All right. Any last questions?
So I got here a little late. It was Web Purify was the last thing we were looking at.
I'm sorry?
I got here late, but that last project page you had is called Web Purify. Is that anything you're doing?
No, that was an example video.
Oh, all right.
Web Purifier. Oh, the video there. Yeah, that was just I pulled some random Drupal related feeds. I have no idea what's in any of those videos. Yeah, I just plugged them in last minute.
I can imagine they would love to take some of this code,
Yeah.
incorporate it to Cod 8.
Oh yeah.
You know, like, I mean, you could do like this little demo really quickly for like backend. What the hell? Let's use it for other conferences.
Yeah. Why not?
Awesome.
Why not? Yeah. I mean, and like, it'd be great to like be able to set up a kiosk for GovCon or the next Badcamp or whatever that just had information sessions, maps, and whatever else we wanted to throw in there.
Yeah.
That was not me volunteering, by the way.
Is like in terms of the interactions with the screen, is it just touches? Can you do anything with gestures or anything like that?
With what?
With gestures?
No, not specifically. So that was one of the things I struggled with early on. Let me actually, I don't know if I have enough data to show you in the interface I have on this demo. This one here, yeah. So with long lists, like one of my design challenges that I struggled with was we have a lot of horizontal real estate, not a ton of vertical real estate. I wanted to eliminate vertical scrolling as much as possible, which a lot of the kiosk does, but some places it's just not practical to expect that you won't have to scroll vertically. And honestly, I wasn't even sure that a swipe gesture was going to be able to scroll, so I have like little controls that I've peppered throughout the UI just to make sure, worst case scenario, that you have something that you can touch and move. This does work with a swipe, at least on an iPad. I actually don't remember. I know I went and played around with their kiosk installation. I don't remember if it will respond to a swipe at all. But there wasn't anything I did. I know that there are like jQuery libraries, I could have used to make sure that support was there. But I went with a simpler approach of just making sure that the UI would handle whatever.
How is it set up at all to work with like offline mode? Like, it's assuming that every location they go to is going to have Wi-Fi.
Right. No, it's not. Well, yes and no. So I mentioned the performance issue we had, right? And at the end of the day, the slowest performing piece was actually like my Drupal site because I'd made a conscious decision, no caching on that end. I just didn't want to, no complexity on that end. I didn't need him calling me to ask why this change he made didn't work because I was not signed on to support this thing in the future. So what I ended up doing, I also have a script in their implementation of the kiosk that'll just pull down all that stuff. And because of the way I have the Angular app implemented, I just point that resource to a local resource, which is just a directory of, it's essentially just pull down all the JSON into directories on the kiosk. So that information is there, and it'll work fine. However, they are, the web server that this is actually coming from is a remote server at this point. So that would be an issue if they try to load it. Obviously, it's not going to load. And there is some caching in the UI, but it's not. I haven't done anything to ensure that it persists, right? So if they're traveling to a location that doesn't have Wi-Fi, they're pretty much hosed at this point. But yeah, we haven't reached the traveling phase formally at this point. The first deliverable was just that proof of concept set up in their building.
Are you able to grab alt tags and stuff like that for the images, and how are you getting that data?
You are. I didn't worry about it here. As far as making it web accessible, that wasn't a priority of mine. So it's not there.
Are you just grabbing the source and then just plugging that into an image tag in Angular, or are you grabbing HTML?
I'm grabbing the source, the image source, and just plugging that into an image tag. I have directives for a lot of the images actually because they have that that effect you saw on the home screen with the little boxes. They really like that, by the way.
Yeah, that looks good.
Level effort-wise, how long did it actually take you to solve the other?
Start to finish, 2 months of my free time, really. So, yeah. Well, yeah. That's the other part, right? How much free time did I actually have? So I've done a lot. I've done a lot with I guess I call them like weird Angular experiments. I like to play around it and just kind of see what I can come up with. So I had a really good idea starting off, like exactly how I was going to build this thing. Like I had the luxury, I produced the designs, so I kind of designed to what I knew I could build and build quickly. So that was an advantage to this project as well. All right. Well, I guess if there aren't any more questions, thank you guys, and thanks for being a great audience.